Okay, guys, this is going to be a little bit longer. Hopefully, we can make it short. This is going to be your review on cognition. It will include memory, language, and thinking, and that is how the AP exam will kind of package all of this together. So, while we talked about this in roughly about three different units, those three units combine to make the section on cognition. We're going to first talk about memory. For memory, you need to go back to the Atkinson-Shiffrin 3 model stage of memory. Remember, it always starts with the sensory information, so all the information from your outside world coming in, you have to selectively attend to only a few things. You have iconic versus echoic memory. Icons or iconic visual information, it lasts for about a second. Echoic, it's this 4 second kind of processing loop that we have where we can often parrot back without really processing what has been said to us, but it hangs out. It allows us to decide whether or not it's worth listening to. Short-term memory. So once something has passed through the filter of sensory memory, it will go into your short-term or working memory. Remember, your working memory actually has four components to it. It is going to have your visual spatial sketch pad. It allows you to kind of mentally see something and rearrange it. It's going to have your phonological loop. It's going to be that thing that kind of actually has a kind of a cell phone to yourself. You can hear yourself think, you can talk through it. It's going to have your episodic buffer. It allows you to kind of temporarily pause everything. And then the last one, which is kind of questionable, is the central executive. It's what allows you to focus. Short-term capacity is going to be 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information for roughly about 20 to 30 seconds. Once information has bypassed short-term memory, it then goes into long-term memory. And again, you're going to pay attention to, rehearse, and further encode information to get it into long-term memory. Long-term memory is a limitless storehouse of information. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get destroyed in that storehouse or sometimes lost in the storehouse. Remember, we're talking about a giant storehouse. You put something in a corner, you walk away from it, you never go back and see it. It may get damaged or you may not be able to find that corner again. So while it is limitless, it doesn't mean that it doesn't come without problems. So that big storehouse of information, that's where you put away your information. It is the only area that you can say, I recall or I remember from. So different types of long-term memory recollections. You have recall versus recognition. Recall is infinitely harder than recognition. Recall means that you bring all the information to the forefront of your mind by yourself. Recognition just is saying, I've seen it before. Recall is writing an essay. Recognition is guessing on a multiple choice. I've seen that one before. It must be the correct answer. Flashbulb memories are long-term memories. They are going to be heavily emotionally salient. So they feel like you took the picture with the flash on. Lots of detail, lots of emotion, but they can also be prone to error. Long-term potentiation is the neural underpinnings for memory. So the more often you visit a memory, the more often you fire the neurons, the stronger the memory becomes. It's like going by and making sure that you pave over a road, that you keep it kind of in tip-top condition. Stress, on the other hand, erodes the road. So if you're not going through and remembering things and patching them up on a regular basis, stress can also erode it. Your memory cues, no state dependent memory, the physiological state that you're in can impact how you retrieve information. So if you're on a lot of caffeine or if you are drinking or somehow have introduced something that might alter your physiological state, that will impede your ability to remember that information when you're no longer in that state. Mood congruent is the emotional context cue. So being happy, you remember things better when you're happy, and when you're angry, you remember things that you encoded when you're angry. And context effects. Context matters. So the context in which you learn something is often better to try to retrieve the information in the exact same context. So hopefully you are sitting at a desk while you study because that's how you're going to be taking your task. The context matters. So context effect is like scrimmages and practicing like you play. To further encode information, use rehearsal, repeat it over and over again. It allows you to manipulate it in your short-term memory and then further store it in long-term. Chunking, we take related information and we put them into units. Now, you can only chunk things in meaningful units, so you can't just put random things together and call it a chunk. Other things you should know, primacy versus recency effect. In learning things in a series, you're more likely to remember things at the beginning and the things at the end. Primacy because you were paying attention and you're highly attentive at the beginning. Recency because it's in your short-term memory. Therefore, it gives you the opportunity to rehearse with it before it disappears from that, making it more effective in your long-term memory. Spacing effect, is the difference between distributed practice and mass practice. Distributed practice, a little bit of practice every single day, mass practice right at the end. So I told you guys in class today, I'd rather see you try to put 10 or 15 minutes in every single night than going and doing the oh crap, the test is tomorrow. The oh crap, the test is tomorrow is not going to pay off. There's just too much content. You're going to fizzle out. Other types of memory. You're explicit or you're declarative. I can explain something to you or I can declare it to you. They're essentially the same kind of concept. So these are the ones that are dictated by your hippocampus. They are the stories of your life. They are the facts that you can verbally express. So an episodic memory is like a television episode. It might be the most boring television episode you have ever watched, but it might be, what did you do for dinner? I sat down and I had a bowl of ramen noodles. Whoop-de-doo. There's your television episode. It was awful, but that's your episodic. Semantic is the meaning memories. So what is the meaning of December 25th? It is Christmas. That's it. Not what did you do on Christmas, but it is in fact Christmas. Implicit memories are procedural memories. They're your how to do. These are dictated by your cerebellum. So your procedural memories are the things that you do without really kind of thinking about because they're muscle memory. They're the things that you do without really trying to process them. And again, if you're trying to remember anything, one of the greatest tools you can use is priming. So give yourself kind of a memoryless memory, give yourself exposure to something and then learn it, and your brain will hit on the fact that you had seen it somewhere else before, and it will kind of key in that this is attention getting information. You should know for the forgetting part, remember Elizabeth Loftus and the misinformation effect. So right below here, I've given you the Atkinson-Shiffrin model again. Make sure you know it. Loftus misinformation effect, that when we go and we pull information from long-term memory, when we retrieve from it, sometimes we don't retrieve a full memory, so we patch in what we think should be there. We may misinform ourselves. Misattribution or source amnesia, it's when I sit there and say, oh, I read this in Scientific American Mind, and when I really read it in Scientific America. Is it that big of a deal? No. It's when I say, oh, remember when Sam said this, and it wasn't Sam, it was actually Brenna, but they sit right next to each other or close enough to each other in class that I was like, oh, but you guys know the area. I got the source wrong. But that's a very small misattribution. Ebbinghaus, know his forgetting curve. Ebbinghaus did the memory study where he had people remember consonant sandwiches. It was a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant, and they were not real words. He had people memorize lists, and he basically said the more often you memorize something, the easier it is for you to remember it. The more repetitions make for easier memory. And we then also looked at the forgetting curve, which shows that you have a very steep forgetting and then it levels off over time. But essentially, by the end of the day, you will have lost roughly around 60 to 70% of all the information that you were taught. You'll come back with roughly about 30% or so. And at that point, it'll gradually decrease. Retrograde and anterograde amnesia. Retrograde is going to be before the accident, I cannot remember. So you guys can't remember the 1970s because it's totally retro. You can't remember before the accident. Anterograde amnesia, after the accident, I can no longer remember that. Impairs your ability to form new memories. So the person can't remember what they did yesterday because they were in a car accident 2 weeks ago. They cannot form new memories. Proactive versus retroactive interference. The memories are there. They're in your long-term memory, but something is kind of blocking them. So remember that I showed you guys the timeline. It goes A, then B, and then whichever direction it's going will then yield the response. So if it's proactive, it's forward acting, meaning old information happens first in a timeline. It basically does a little bit of a Mario action and it squashes down the B, which is the new information, and all you can remember then is that A goes to the finish line and the old information is remembered. Proactive, you remember the old. Retroactive, the new information, or B, because it goes A, then B in a timeline. B actually jumps backward and squashes A, and then B goes across the finish line, and you remember the new information. So retroactive, new information impairs your ability to retrieve old. So proactive interference would be you have your old boyfriend's name, your new boyfriend's name, you're looking at your new boyfriend, and all you can remember is your old boyfriend's name. You learned his name at some point. It's in your head. You just can't seem to pull it out. Retroactive interference. New boyfriend's name, old boyfriend's name. Let's make it in the correct time order. Old boyfriend's name, new boyfriend's name. You're looking at your new boyfriend, and even though you have this old boyfriend, you just can't seem to remember his name. They're in there. They're just interfering with each other. When we talk about repression, that's a Freudian term, and you guys should remember that from defense mechanisms. When we say people repress, the information is in the long-term memory, but they are unable to retrieve it. Now, we would actually say people probably suppress by not actually addressing the information that's in their brain. We don't truly Freudian repress it. The next in line effect, when you are the next person in line, you are fixated on what you are saying or what you are doing, and you don't pay attention to the person in front of you. It is an encoding error. You are unable to encode their information because you are fixated on your own, and therefore you cannot remember the person who was in line in front of you. Tip of the tongue effect, something is almost there, it's right there. That is going to be an interference issue. The information is in your long-term memory. You just can't, for some reason, pull it out. Ways to help you remember, mnemonic devices. So you have methodology. This is you're in your kitchen and you see a dog on the table and the dog is eating and there is honey dripping into, and so it's all of that. Peg word, that's that one where you memorize a list of peg words and then you make associations with them. You guys should know acronyms. Please look those up. All right, so memory is over. Now let's get into thinking and language. Remember the idea of concepts. Concepts are going to be basic ways of looking at chunks of information. You're going to have your superordinate, your subordinate, and your basic concepts. Prototypes are your best examples of something. So it's not your beta run or your alpha run or your first example of something. A prototype is a best example of. So your prototypical cat is like a house cat. Your prototypical dog might be a lab. Schemas are mental frameworks. You guys keep telling me that they're just stereotypes. You have got to stop doing that. Schemas are schematics. It is how you organize and you arrange all the information in your head, not just stereotypes, but factual information, hierarchies, associations. All of that is part of the schema that builds up your kind of cognitive wall. Algorithms, step-by-step methodical methods to get an absolute correct answer. A heuristic is a rule of thumb. Know the availability heuristic and the representativeness heuristic. Availability, rule of thumb based off of what is most available to you in the moment. Representativeness, this is going to be a rule of thumb that you make decisions based off of your mental representation of something. That's more like a stereotype. It is based off of schemas, and I know that gets a little confusing since I told you to stop saying stereotypes and schemas, but literally this is your mental idea of something, and you use that as a shortcut. Fixations. A mental fixation is where you get vapor locked on something. So a mental set is the inability to find a new way to solve a problem because you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Functional fixedness is when you cannot think of a new use or a different use for a tool other than its original purpose. So I'm asking you to break out of a room and you look around the room and there's a pair of scissors and there's, I don't know, shoelaces, whatever. And I'm like, all right, get out of the room. You're like, I can't, because you can't think to use the scissors as maybe a flathead screwdriver to remove the screws in the door or something. Functional fixedness is what is happening there. Overconfidence. The times that you are more confident than you are sometimes right can be a problem to thinking. Confirmation bias, you look only for information that confirms what you already think. Framing, the presentation of information that can influence the way that you make a decision based on how it is presented to you. This is that, would you eat 75% lean meat or would you eat 25% fat? It's the exact same thing, but how you literally dress it up matters. Belief bias. It is a tendency to cling to your previous belief systems, even in the face of negating information. Belief perseverance is the stronger version of this. This is regardless of information that would completely refute what you already think, you still go with what you originally think. Convergent thinking. If thinking converges, it comes to a single correct answer. Divergent thinking, it can go in a million different ways, so you have multiple answers. If you go right back to the book series Divergent, the fact that she wasn't just in one category, she was in one or the other, there's more than one option, it's divergent. All right, with language, phonemes. The smallest unit of sound. Morphemes, the smallest unit of meaning. If you don't know what those are, please come see me. Grammar is made up of semantics, which is word meanings, and syntax, the order in which we put words. Broca's aphasia is the inability to move your mouth to speak. Wernicke's aphasia, inability to comprehend words. You should know the order of speech. You go from babbling, which happens pretty much from about 4 months on. At about 1 year, you get to the one word stage where you will have something like baba mean bottle or baba might mean banana. It depends on the kid. Then you get telegraphic stage at about 24 months or 2 years. And this is where it's very much like a telegraph. So mommy up, doggy run, daddy go. The other thing that you should remember with all of this is that children will have greater receptive language than they will actually have language output. Overgeneralizations, when we're looking at that, an overgeneralization would be possibly something like an overextension. So they see a ball, but the ball is also a sun. The sun is a ball. An apple's a ball. Underextension, only thing that could possibly be a ball is a ball. An overregularization would be when a child overextends the rules of language. So goaded, jumped, anything like that. They add ed, or they instead of saying they fell, they felt. Like instead of I fell down, they say I falled down. They'll overextend or overregularize the rule. You should know Chomsky and you should know Worf. Noam Chomsky has a language acquisition device. This was seen in Genie. This is that critical period hypothesis. We're all born with the ability to take on language. However, we have to be exposed to language. So this is going to be the idea that your brain is set up for language. You just have to have the right program to run. The Benjamin Whorf or the linguistic relativity hypothesis, we understand our world in which the language we are provided. So you have words that are going to be most representative and meaningful to your culture, and that is how you understand the world. B.F. Skinner said that language was basically a system of rewards, but he can't explain for things like the overgeneralization rules. Last thing that we're going to have to talk about, intelligence testing, those kind of ideas. So with this, remember that you are going to have an IQ score, or you could also have a G score. Your G score is by Spearman. It is a single score for intelligence. He felt that a single score was going to be enough. Your IQ score also is a single score for intelligence. Your intelligence quotient is going to be your mental age divided by your chronological age times 100. So if you are 16 with the mental age of a 16-year-old, your IQ should be 100. That means anything that exceeds 100 means that your mental age is older than your chronological. Anything that exceeds, you are older than you are mentally old. Gardner looked at 8 intelligences, so he had the multiple intelligence theory. This is where we looked at savants, or people with one very exceptional ability, even though everywhere else they were probably either mentally retarded or lower functioning. The idea of emotional intelligence, most people think that extends this entire idea of multiple intelligences too far. Coming back to convergent and divergent thinking, creative people tend to be divergent thinkers. They come up with multiple answers to a single problem. Intelligence testing, told you the intelligence quotient, you should know how to factor that. Factor analysis, when you take a test, usually you're not asked a single kind of line of questioning. You may get something on math, you may get something on vocabulary, you may get something like your SAT scores. It's a score, but it's composed from different factors. And again, we use factor analysis when we talk about personality testing. Famous tests, you should know Binet-Simon. Binet and Simon are going to be the original kind of intelligence tests. The Stanford Binet is one that's still currently used, anywhere from 2 to 90. You should know the Wechsler scales. They have a verbal component and they also have a performance component, and they have the WISC, the WAS, and the WPPSI. Tests should be standardized, meaning that they're normed against a population. They should be reliable, meaning that they get the same results every single time. So a reliable test is going to be one that you either reliably fail it or you reliably pass it, but you get the same results time and time again. You can test this by test retest, split half reliability. Validity, it tests what it intends to test. That can be either content validity or it can be predictive validity. The difference between an aptitude versus an achievement test. Aptitude is going to guess at what you should be good at. So if it's a valid aptitude test, you should find out that the test is pretty predictive in nature, that it actually is pretty good at it. If it is a not valid one, it may tell you, like I told you guys in class today, that it says you're a great mechanic, but you're an awful mechanic. And you take the test again and it tells you should be a great mechanic, and so it's very reliable at giving you wrong information. It's just not valid. Achievement is what you take when it tests what you should know. what you have already achieved. A normal curve distribution is what we used to look at for IQ tests. You need to know the percentages for this. 68% of people fall within one standard deviation of the norm. That is going to be anywhere from 85 to 115, with the average being 100. So 15 to each side. Then you're going to have roughly about 12% after that standard deviation, anywhere from 115 to 130, or 85 down to 70. Below 70 becomes the defining point for mental retardation, plus the fact that the person is unable to physically care for themselves. Again, after that, you have another 15-point deviation down. That's going to be roughly about 2%. And then the fourth deviation off of that is going to be less than a percentage. Mental retardation, know the definition. It's usually an IQ that is below 70 with the inability to care for yourself. Down syndrome comes from trisomy 21. It's the presence of an extra chromosome. It is a form of mental retardation. However, while possibly mentally deficient and having difficulty caring for themselves, most people with Down syndrome are able to take on jobs, not live completely independent, but they have very fulfilling lives. FAS is also short for fetal alcohol syndrome. It is the leading cause of mental retardation here in the United States. It is caused by alcohol consumption during pregnancy. The Flynn effect. This is the idea that IQ scores have been increasing over the years. So us compared to 100 years ago, our IQs have improved. Hunt is going to be the human enrichment or tutored human enrichment. This is the idea that your environment impacts your intelligence. So nutrition, early education, all of those things also help with intelligence scores. We'll look at twin studies. Identical twins usually have nearly identical IQ scores. We'll look at fraternal twins. The early environment does matter. Adoption studies, your IQ is more similar to your biological parents than maybe your adoptive parents. Age and IQ, after about the age of 6, your IQ becomes a bit more stable in nature. But then again, remember, anywhere from birth to 6 is a huge jump in all things that require mental activity.